When you summarize values using a pivot table, you might want to identify the largest and smallest values it contains. In this movie, I will show you how to identify sets of top or largest and bottom or smallest values by creating top and bottom 10 rules. I will use the top values sample file, which you can find in the Chapter 5 folder of your exercise files archive. This pivot table contains monthly sales data, and what I want to do is identify, say, the top 5 values in the body of the pivot table. To do that, I click any data cell, and then on the Home tab of the ribbon, in the Styles group, click the Conditional Formatting button, and point to Top Bottom Rules, which is the second item in the list. Doing so displays a list of top and bottom rules that I can create. So I can identify the top 10 items, the top 10% items, same for the bottom 10 or bottom 10%, and also above average or below average values. I'll show you how to create a top 10 item conditional format, a bottom 10% conditional format, and also an above average conditional format. So you'll get one of each type in this movie. Let's start out by looking at the top 10 items. So I'll click that in the list, and doing so displays the top 10 items dialog box. This dialog box contains two fields. The first is the number of items, so it's called a top 10 conditional format, but you can actually change the number of items. So in this case, let's change it from 10 to 6. So I'll click in the box, backspace over 10, type the number 6, and the second box, the one to the right, lets you select or create a format. If you click the format's down arrow, you can select from a list of predefined formats, or you can click custom format. The format cells dialog box appears, and because the last tab that I used in this dialog box was fill, that is the tab that appears. So if it doesn't show up in your copy of Excel, please go ahead and click the fill tab to display it. Let's say that I want to fill a cell that meets my criteria for this rule with yellow. So the top 6 values in the body of the pivot table will be formatted with a yellow fill. So I'll click the yellow swatch here, and my sample appears below. I'll click OK to close this dialog box, and then I'll click OK to apply the format. Now note that this cell is highlighted in yellow, even though the number 11,730 is nowhere near being in the top 6 values inside this pivot table. That's because when you create a conditional format, it only applies the format to the selected cells. So if I'd wanted, I could have selected cells B5 to D9. But instead, I just apply the format to a single cell, and now I can determine which cells I want to apply the format to. To do that, I'll click the Formatting Options action button, which appears to the right of the selected cell. I have 3 options: Selected Cells, which is the default and is what Excel used when I created this conditional format; All Cells containing sum of sales values, which applies the rule to all cells within the pivot table, including grand totals and subtotals. Those values will always be larger than individual values within the body of the pivot table, so we don't want to use them. The last one, all cells showing a sum of sales values for department and month, is what we want to use because it limits the conditional format to cells within the body of the pivot table. So I will go ahead and click that option, and Excel identifies the 6 cells with the largest values, in other words, the top 6 values in the pivot table. And as per the rule, those cells are highlighted in yellow. I'll go ahead and remove the rule by clicking the Undo button on the Quick Access toolbar. You could also press Ctrl-Z. Now let's say that I want to identify the bottom 25% of the values in the pivot table. I know I want to apply that format to the values in cells B5 through D9, so I'll go ahead and select those cells. That'll save me a step later. And then on the Home tab, click Conditional Formatting, point to Top and Bottom Rules, and I'll click Bottom 10%. And just like I had before, I can identify the percentage of values that I want to apply the format to. And instead of 10%, I'll edit the value in the left-hand box so it's 20. And because I've already shown you how to create a format earlier in this movie, I'll just stay with the default, which is light red fill with dark red text, and click OK. Doing so displays the bottom 20% of values, which in this case is 3. And just by coincidence, they all happen to be in the dance department. So sales from the dance department are definitely lower than sales for all of the other departments. I have one more format to apply, so I'll just click the Undo button to get rid of this one. I'll leave the same cells selected, and again on the Home tab, click Conditional Formatting, point to Top Bottom Rules, and I'll click Above Average. Doing so identifies cells that are above average within the body of the pivot table. Because I'm identifying above average values, I don't need to create any sort of rule to do that. Selecting this type of conditional format does that for me. Just for variety, I will select a different format from one of the prepared formats. So I'll click the Format Boxes down arrow, and I'll do red text. I'll just click the red text format, click OK, and when I click away from the selection, you can see that the cells that contain above average values now contain red text. Those are the basics of creating top and bottom rules. You can go by a number of items, you can go by percentage, or you can also identify items that are above or below average within the body of the pivot table.